Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of Chapter 4, the lecture on the mundane right view. This might overall be the 10th video in the lecture series, and we will continue where we left off last time. This time around the video might be a bit longer, as we have still 30 slides to go in this lecture, but it's still a bit too little to make 2 lecture videos out of it. So last time we talked about very important aspects, namely why most knowledge seems useless to almost everyone out there. Only a tiny minority of knowledge is relevant to everyone, and this relevance determines pretty much why someone would want to learn something. So you always need a reason to search for something. You need a reason to search for a solution, and that usually requires a problem. Then we had a short story time last time that highlighted a few aspects about the Buddha's life. Then we learned why the Buddha was very much in favor of focusing on yourself first. And then we learned a lot about the limitations of language and why it is so easy to misunderstand each other. And this time around, we start with the right view before Sotapadhi. Sotapadhi is another word that describes the first stage of awakening according to the Buddha, namely the stream entry or the right view. Right view is just a synonym for stream entry, which is also very important. I think many people do not know that, but whenever there is a right view, or occurs the word right view in the Pali Canon, in the sutta text that the Buddha pretty much very likely spoke, or lectures that the Buddha very likely gave, then that indicates that he is talking about the fundamental understanding that ultimately sets you free from suffering. And today we will understand what is necessary to even end up at that right view, namely right view for right view, or as the Buddha called it, the mundane right view, which is very important. And this is a concept that is not very much new or anything. Many people use that concept, and for example, famous investor Charlie Munger called right view a divine gift. So when someone corrects you, then he said you should regard that as a gift. Almost nobody is interested in that, because it is criticism of a kind, and it feels bad at first. Yet, it is the best thing that can happen to you when someone corrects a mistake of yours, because then you will not repeat that same mistake for the rest of your life, which is a very, very good thing for you, and only for your benefit, even if it feels bad at first. Being corrected always feels like an attack on your character. And the Buddha, for example, named that right view is twofold and very much essential for your spiritual progress. He said that there is a mundane part that, for example, Charlie Munger was also talking about, and then there is a supramundane part, which Charlie Munger was not talking about, but the Buddha was very much talking about that. And the mundane part applies pretty much in any area. Thinking, for example, that you understand something then leads to no additional effort at understanding. So that is why a wrong view can cause so much harm. And not understanding is always our starting position. So whenever we try to understand something new, we have literally no idea of what there even is that we do not know yet. So we have to invest some effort to even uncover how much there is to learn. And this is also known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you pretty much are under the assumption that you know a lot more than you do know, simply because you do not know how much there can be known, which is also very interesting. And we will think we understand many times before we truly understand Buddhism, which is also very important and something that you should keep in mind. And the Buddha's mundane right view is very related to the contemporary self-improvement mindset. And as we will see later and discuss in detail, it involves things like taking up personal responsibility, being self-honest, having a mindset that allows for making mistakes and learning from them, and such things. And that is very important, and there can be no progress without, but it is not yet the Dhamma as the Buddha talked about. And just to give you an example, to make it even more clear why wrong views are such a problem, imagine being a strength athlete. You watch some videos on YouTube, are really new, maybe read a book, and now you think yourself an expert on the topic simply because you have read a book and really prepared yourself well. And now imagine that the videos or books left out the parts about warming yourself up before you start lifting. This might work in the beginning when the weights are still manageable, but the heavier everything gets, well, the more problems and nagging injuries you will develop, and over time you will hurt yourself. The problem, in this case, is a wrong view. You assume that you know how it works, and In the end, you don't, because you have some missing piece of the puzzle. And that problem is very fundamental and applies in literally every area. You can always have some missing piece of information that would be necessary for you to understand the entire topic, for example, much better. So the problem is always at the core a wrong view. You assume you do something right, but don't. It's a tricky poison, as it fools you into believing that you are done already, which is not true in many cases, which is also a problem in spiritual circles. And the problem might be an extension of our energy conservation drive, as thinking is very costly, and we always like to be right from the beginning. Again, it feels bad not to be right, but yeah. So as you can see, having wrong views is a really big problem, and having a right view on all things is a very, very good idea. And the noble qualities, as the Buddha calls them, or the part of the mundane right view, the necessary preconditions, can be seen here. The first step is that you should accept your condition and that you might be wrong. Your own history of improvement, as an example, should you be interested in self-improvement, disproves your current assumption of rightness, as you have always been wrong in the past, simply by the fact that you always got better. And when you get better, that automatically means that you have not been as good before. So there were flaws that you fixed over time. And there's no reason to assume that this time is any different. But all of this very much goes against our ego. And we conflate wrong facts with us being wrong and hate that idea, which is also very important. We always make it personal. In fact, normally it's just an opinion that exists independent of a person. But as we own that opinion, we feel attacked when that opinion gets challenged. The process and progress is only possible when you think there is something to progress towards, which is also a very necessary precondition. And then there is a need, as I already mentioned, for self-honesty and responsibility to even find the own shortcomings. You cannot fix something that you do not know of, and you can only find a flaw when you are very self-honest and take responsibility for your behavior. If you don't take responsibility for certain things, then you do not think that you can change them, and your brain will rationalize the work that is necessary to overcome your own flawed behavior away, which is very important. The brain always does that. We hate work. We try to avoid it whenever possible, and as a result, we shy away from self-honesty. Okay, but let us now come to the next slide. And this slide is about the role of faith, the very pragmatic role of faith. It is not the same kind of faith that is necessary in Buddhism as compared to other religions where faith pretty much never stops. In Buddhism, it is just a delay. You have to be humble and have faith so that that others might know better than you. Otherwise, you would not learn from them. And this type of faith is just a delay of disbelief. And it's necessary in the beginning because you cannot really check facts for yourself. You need a foundation of knowledge. Otherwise, you cannot check. You cannot fact check. It's impossible. There always has to be a solid basis before you can start checking. And until then, you have to go by faith. But again, it's just a delay of disbelief to the point of testing. And false pride, for example, is a very big hindrance to getting assistance. If you always think you know better, as an example, and think that there is no one out there that has any clue, then you cannot really learn anything. And this might be a supreme hindrance. And don't, as a result, don't be hard to correct and defensive when someone challenges your view who might know better than you. If his criticism is legit, then change your ways. If his criticism is not so nice, then you can just ignore it. Why be upset about it? And you have to ponder if you fix symptoms or ultimate problems for a very long time, as an example, because this is one of the main parts of wrong views, that we think that we identified the cause of a problem, but in reality we have just found another symptom in a long chain of cause and effect. And it is a good idea to gather a lot of knowledge and refine your understanding for a long time, and this is really necessary to make any progress when it comes to spirituality. It is a lot about understanding and learning. It cannot happen without it. When people say that you just have to follow meditation methods, that is not true. They always ignore how much reading goes on in the background, how much trying to understand goes on. It's not the meditation or the meditation cushion that gets the progress done. It surely helps, no question about it, but the ultimate release from suffering happens through understanding. This cannot be overstated, and the Buddha was so clear on it. He always said it's about wisdom, it's about insight, it's not about following some virtuous method or something like that. And don't, also a short word of warning, it's not about gathering knowledge, it's about understanding a new experience. So don't just be addicted to reading one book about philosophy after another. A good rule of thumb for an advanced practitioner is maybe 5% reading, 15% pondering, and 80% practicing. And this is also very important. The reading is absolutely necessary, especially in the beginning. You can read a lot and have to have a solid foundation of knowledge. Otherwise, you will go wrong. But at some point, it has to be dropped. And then you ponder and try to understand. And in the last phase, you're pretty much only practicing and nothing else. There'll still be some reading going on to fix some missing pieces of the puzzle that you have. But overall, you just read, just practice in the end. But now to a few wrong views, which is also very important. And in the meditation context, there are a few very special wrong views that we discussed today that are very important. The Buddha named two, and Ajahn Chah gave us a very nice quotation that I really like to read to you right now. And I think it's from A Place of Coolness, Right View, A Place of Coolness, a talk of Ajahn Chah. And he said, "We don't really know anything in the beginning, and so we are fooled by people's lies. As they point out what is right as being wrong, and we believe that. That which is wrong, they say is right, and we believe that too. This is because we are not yet our own masters. Our moods lie to us constantly, and we shouldn't take this mind and its opinion as our guide, because it does not know the truth yet." And this points to a very important problem. Our moods and feelings lie to us. The feelings determine not what is good and bad for us. They are things that feel bad in the short term, but are very beneficial in the long term. And we should seek for those things. And the Buddha was very clear that the Dhamma is all about those things that initially feel bad, but are ultimately very, very good for you. And our moods lie. This is a very important concept. It is not all about feelings. Yes, there are always feelings involved, but it's very important to acknowledge that a mood can lie to you. It's not always right. Your intuition might be a problem. I also have other videos on the channel on that topic. But now to the very fundamental problematic views. The Buddha called them eternalism and annihilationism. And this might be one of the biggest problems out there. For example, one group of people at the Buddha's times, and all views that are possible pretty much fall into those two categories, was that the world is not real, there is nothing good or bad, there are no beings, no real beings, Nibbana and Samsara are really the same, and the self simply becomes non-existent after birth, nicht after rebirth. I have a small typo there. And the Buddha gave very vivid descriptions for those wrong views. And this annihilationist view can be compared to a nihilistic view nowadays. And what it essentially says is, one does not act of one's own volition, or of another's volition, or a person's volition overall. There is no power nor energy, no human strength or vigor. All sentient beings, living creatures, beings, souls, they lack control, power and energy. They are just molded by destiny, by circumstance and nature. They experience pleasure and pain in the 6 classes of rebirth, but there's pretty much nothing that you can do. And regardless of what you do, fools and wise people upon death are destroyed and perish, and they do not exist. They do not have to bear any consequences of their behavior. And the core of all of this is that pretty much everything seems to be determined or predetermined to those people. And there's a very important distinction between determined and predetermined. Yes, ultimately things happen on their own. And this is one of the main problems that people experience when they start getting a glimpse of the Buddha's teachings and getting a glimpse of non-self. Yes, there is non-self going on, but before you have fully understood it, there is very much volition involved. There is very much responsibility involved for everything that you should take responsibility for, namely all your acts, all your actions that require a self. As long as you have a self, there is choice involved. The burden of choice is only put down as an arahant. So this is a main misunderstanding. From a pragmatic point of view, you should approach the problem as follows. There is responsibility and choice until you have fully laid down the burden. So this is very important. This determinism is not predeterminism also, by the way. It's not like everything is predetermined. It's just dependent origination at work. Yes, there is no real personal choice involved, but there is still choice going on. The overall experience can still not be predicted, which is extremely important to keep in mind. So this is just a very short discourse on one of the main problems that people usually encounter. Because as soon as they get a glimpse of non-self, they think, there's no choice at all. While they still have a lot of choosing going on. They choose to believe that there is no choice going on. And yeah, this leads to nihilism, or as the Buddha put it, to non-doing. And this should be avoided at all costs, because as soon as you meme yourself into a belief of non-doing, then you will not make any additional effort at practicing, and that is obviously a bad thing. The practice could set you free, ultimately, to ever suffer again, but you choose not to do it, because it is unpleasant to progress. Anyway, the second kind of wrong view is eternalism, or speculation, pretty much. And it has been described by the Buddha in many ways. For example, that external gods created the world, and that the ultimate goal of the spiritual life is union with this entity that created the world. And salvation or liberation would be the recovery of the eternal. And it has been described by the Buddha as follows, or the underlying problem has been described as follows. Here amongst a certain ascetic, by means of effort and exertion, remembers 1, 2, 3, 100,000 lives, or world expansions and contractions even, which would correspond to the Big Bang plus the contractions that might follow after. And as a result of remembering that, due to their own effort, they think that the self and the world are eternal, barren, like a mountain peak, set firm as a post. These beings rush around, circulate, pass away, and re-rise, but this remains eternally. Namely, there is a soul, a self, or something like that, that makes the entire process going on continue for all eternity. And this kind of view involves a lot of speculation about future, about self, about soul, world, infinity, eternal, non-casualty, eel wiggling, which is also a very important concept. Those are people who never commit to any kind of view. And the Buddha criticized those the most of all, people who never commit to any view, who always just criticize and never actually say anything. And he said that those people are the most confused of them all. And all those kinds of speculation lead to non-doing, because you start speculating instead of doing, instead of practicing, instead of doing something that could actually set you free. Because in the end, the world does not have to be eternal. There is an escape from samsara, which is what the Buddha discovered. You don't have to suffer for all eternity. This is pretty much what the Buddha taught. Yeah, and pretty much all those wrong views that the Buddha named. In Digha Nikaya number 1, he named, I think, 62 kinds of wrong views, are pretty much based on a wrong assumption about many different topics, but mainly about the self, or about space, time, externalness, or something else. But a stream enterer knows them as wrong. He has understood what the Buddha was really teaching, and then for him there is no longer any confusion. There is still doubt going on, but it cannot affect him anymore. This is why he went beyond doubt. Because the doubt, even if it is there, it's not touching the stream enterer anymore, which is why and how it is possible to overcome doubt. But now to the actual Buddha's mundane right view in much detail, and how he phrased it. Again, this is very important for anyone who strives for stream entry, or who wants to actually escape the circle of rebirth and death. So how did the Buddha describe the mundane right view and the real right view? He said in Majjhima Nikaya 117, therein monks' right view comes first, also very important. And what monks is right view? Right view, I say, is twofold. There is right view that is affected by taints, and there is right view that is noble. And what monks is mundane right view? There is what is given, and what is offered, and what is sacrificed, and there is fruit and result of good and bad actions. Namely, not just determinism. There is this world and the other. There is mother and father. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously. There are in this world good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the next, or the other world. And this statement is loaded with information, and it's very important. First of all, there is a distinction between the mundane right view and the real right view. So those are two different things. And he said that the mundane right view is affected by taints. And this is also a statement that most people do not like, because it feels bad to be tainted or something like that. But it's also important to keep in mind that there are taints that bring you to hell, and that there are taints that bring you to heaven. Nonetheless, from the Buddha's point of view, from the ultimate freedom from suffering point of view, both are taints. Yet they are totally different in quality. And yeah, the mundane right view goes on, and it is as follows. First of all, there is the aspect of there are results of good and bad actions that you do. So there is responsibility, there is doing, there is sense of control, and you have to work through it. So you have to work through that wrong understanding of yours, because you have it. There is mother and father. You cannot avoid that by memeing yourself into a belief that everything is not real. That's not how it works. You have a sense of control, and you have to overcome it indirectly, which is something that we learn in chapter 6. We cannot just intellectually think our way to Nibbana. That is not possible. It has to be based on experience, based on understanding, based on insight. And another part is that there are recluses and Brahmins. There are virtuous people who teach the way out of this all. This is a component of faith that is also absolutely necessary and very important. Without believing that there are some people who know a way out, you will never make an effort to meet them and try to understand what they teach. So that kind of faith is necessary until you can confirm it for yourself. And that is very possible in Buddhism. You don't have to wait eternally for someone else to for death or some other example to be liberated. And again, you can always scan the QR code at the bottom to see the sutta, because I always shorten it to fit it on a slide. But yeah, there is mother and there is father part is probably some of the aspect, if not the aspect, that is most misunderstood about the mundane wrong view. And what it points at is that we are affected by wrong views, by our implicit wrong assumptions about reality. So we should accept our current starting position that we are in and work with it, not against it, or deny it in any other way. We have certain beliefs, and we have a tendency to think in certain directions, and we have to work with that. We have to fully acknowledge how it is, and then we can change and gradually modify it. If we deny it, we will never make any effort at changing it, because we think it is different or meme ourselves into believing that it's different. We tend to rationalize and ignore certain things to alleviate our suffering. But the world, as it is, does exist for us. And it's not just a meaningless particle clump that is external to us. That is in itself also a wrong view. So we have to work with what we have. And there is nothing wrong with that. That is our starting position, and we then have to gradually refine it to ultimately overcome suffering. We can never overcome suffering by ignoring parts of experience. The teachings of the Buddha are perfectly in line with reality and how it works. And while non-self is true, we still feel like we have a self and have to work with it. We cannot overcome the self-belief, even if it is wrong, by mere reasoning alone. It has to be based on insight, based on the right view, based on understanding of dependent origination. There is literally no other way. But the problem is on the level of feeling, not on the intellectual knowledge level. We feel still bad, even if we have acquired some intellectual knowledge, and even if we believe that it is true what the Buddha said. We still feel bad. We don't feel like he is right. And don't work based on wrong assumptions. This is pretty much the gist of all of it. You start with an assumed wrong sense of self and control and must work through it by gradually refining that understanding until it matches how reality really is. That is the gist of it. And then there is also the part of basic logic that we also have to accept. The Buddha was a very logical person, and he never really said anything that contradicted himself, at least in the initial text. Later, people added a lot to the Buddha and tried to contribute it to him or attribute it to him, which is not very much in line with anything that the early texts resemble. There are laws of nature, for example, the law of karma, that applies both to social and physical things. It's pretty much a law of cause and effect and graduality, and those are axiomatic. Change is there. Change happens. We can observe it all the time. Samsara is the world of change, as an example. And that change works based on cause and effect, which includes a statement on dependent origination, if you think about it. And the best idea that a person who is new to Buddhism has should be to choose teachings that are in line with basic logic. And the oldest suttas, as an example, are a very good starting point because they are very logical. You can check that for yourself. For now, you might have to take me by the word and just believe me until you can test it for yourself. But yeah, they are free from contradiction and very logical. And you need that initial phase to suspect truth in old things or things like the Dhamma that the Buddha taught. And your experience as a Pratujana is just a person who has not yet understood the Dhamma, goes against the Dhamma. The grain of the world, is what the Buddha said, is how the Pratujana, the worldling, lives. He chases pleasure, he only knows that way. And until you have understood the Dhamma will pretty much appear not as very pleasant to you, because it goes against everything that you deem worthwhile. You really need an event that sparks the interest in the Dhamma, otherwise you will not go look for it. You really need a reason. And that reason is usually suffering of great kind. Otherwise, it's very rare that any person encounters the Dhamma. There are some notable exceptions in the suttas, but most people had to have such an event in their life happening. There always has to be a reason for noble search, as the Buddha put it. So yeah, But let us continue. All this view, the mundane right view, leads to the right kind of attention. And the Buddha called right attention womb attention. This is the root of the word right attention, womb attention. And womb attention sounds very, very vivid and very practical, in my opinion at least. Womb attention means that you direct your attention at those things that cause other things in your experience. Parts of your experience fully rely on other parts of your experience. So one part of the experience can be called the womb, and the other part, the baby that comes out of it. This is a nice way of looking at it. But for that to work, you have to be able to see two things at once. And that is completely necessary to verify anything that is going on in the suttas. So you have to go by faith until you can confirm that. So endless faith is not necessary and good in Buddhism, but faith that allows you to test certain things, that is absolutely necessary. And this kind of womb attention is an absolutely core principle that has to be checked and understood here and now. You have to have the ability to see two things at once. And this very much goes against many of the modern traditions of Buddhism that say that everything happens in quick succession. That is never anything that the Buddha said. All parts of experience are here at once, at the same time. It's a non-temporal kind of dependence. There are parts of your experience that fully determine other parts of your experience. For example, your feeling, the Vedana, the hedonic kind of feeling, determines pretty much everything, like craving and the self. It always exists in relation to the hedonic kind of feeling. Yet all the hedonic kinds of feelings and the self and other things are there at the same time. And all of this above is necessary to someday attain stream entry. Based on that, you can try to understand the dependent origination principle, which will ultimately set you free. And a few very important questions now come to mind. So how can you test if you have the right view or if you are on the right track? Even though the entire stream entry business or the entire attaining of right view business is an unmistakable experience. There are people who still like to say that stream entry is just a blinking out of experience, a missing frame of consciousness. That is absolutely not true. Stream entry is unmistakable. You will suddenly understand everything that the Buddha was talking about in the matter of days or weeks and at most months. Then you have a more or less perfect understanding of what the Buddha was talking about. And good questions that you could ask yourself to see if you are on the right way or have already attained it are as follows. First of all, do I suffer as much as before, experiencing the same things? And if so, why? I will always add the if so, why, because everything is an understanding. It's not about experiences. You have to understand your experiences. And the best guide that we have, as we learned in the last chapter, in chapter 3, is suffering. The Buddha's teaching is all about not suffering anymore. So if you suffer less, given the same circumstances, then you are very likely on the right track. And another question is, do I get rid of arisen suffering or does it not arise anymore? The Buddha's teachings are about non-arising of suffering. You get rid of the causes and conditions of suffering. So it cannot be there anymore, given the same circumstances. It's not that you get rid of it in a skillful way by meditating 8 hours a day and there not experiencing suffering. Even during your daily living, there's no suffering anymore. Do I avoid suffering or can't it be there anymore? This is the interesting question. Do I fully understand all the different words that the Buddha uses, like feelings, vedana, craving, tanha, mind, which has 3 different meanings, vijnana and vijnana. I always forget the third one, but Shita and Mano are 2 examples. So whenever you read mind, it's not necessarily the mind that you're thinking about. And then there is dukkha, suffering, and all those remarks and everything. Do you fully understand them? If not, then you are probably not there yet. Am I drawn towards seclusion, or do I delight in social situations? And do I understand why? It's also a good marker. Is my mindfulness ever increasing? And do I understand why? Also a very good question, because in the end it is all about mindfulness, right mindfulness even. And right mindfulness is always based on the right view. Do I still doubt the meditative practice? And if so, in what area? So there should you clarify your understanding so that you ultimately can overcome doubt. There is a point in time where you should just endure doubt to ultimately transcend it. But until then, in the beginning, there's a good place where you should learn. You should learn a lot and clarify the meaning of everything in your experience. And then And then there is another question. Do I understand with certainty what makes me suffer and how I immediately escape it when it arises? The word or the emphasis is on escaping suffering. Do I know how that works? That is the special knowledge of a stream enterer. The Buddha was very clear about it. The most common phrasing of stream entry, or the attaining of the right view, is the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths state that you understand suffering, how it comes to be, how to remove it, and what the way is to remove it. And is the motivation behind my actions rooted in greed, aversion, or delusion? Another very important part. Because all actions that are rooted in those three things require a self. And ultimately, Buddhism is about non-self. So whenever you still engage in all those activities that require a self, then you are more likely regressing than progressing on the Buddhist path. And do I believe in teachers or practices because they sound agreeable and nice and it feels good to believe in them? Or do you follow them because it is true and you could verify it? Truth, especially in the beginning, can be uncomfortable. The Buddha was very clear that Dhamma goes against the grain of your feelings. The Buddha said that the Dhamma is for people who are skilled in feeling. Also, very important to keep in mind. And another very important aspect is that you should see danger in the slightest fault or the slightest misunderstanding. You should not be negligent. If something is not 100% wholesome, it's better to avoid it and just to be sure. Buddhism is about understanding experiences, not about the content, even if the content is mystical, even if there are divine experiences of pleasure. If you don't understand them, what brings them to be, what is their ultimate nature, then it's worthless from the point of liberation. There is still benefit for feeling good, that is undeniable, but it's not the Dhamma. And we here in this lecture try to understand the Dhamma and not feel too good. And now to an important aspect that also relates to the mundane right view, namely practice versus meditation. Because nowadays people have memed themselves into believing that meditation on the meditation cushion is all that it takes, and that could not be further from the truth. So what is it? What is practice and what is meditation? There is this widespread belief that meditation is all it takes. And formal meditation or meditation when people talk about it, is pretty much always the sitting with closed eyes on a meditation cushion for an hour or two a day. And they regard that as a duty, but that also leads to only 1/15th part of the day practicing. Or if it's 2 hours, it's 1/8th part of the day or something like that. But yeah, since you're also sleeping. The meditative practice, however, that the Buddha taught, is taking into account everything that you do all day. Formal meditation is just one ingredient of the whole. But yeah, it is a wrong view to think that all it takes is meditation to awaken. That is not true. You have to understand a lot, you have to have the right circumstances, you have to make the right effort, and there are many other ingredients that also have to be there. So many things are meditative practice, and only one thing is formal meditation. It is just one ingredient, but it's not all. So there are certain things, and I listed them in order of significance, let's put it like that, that are also practice. And the first thing is that the Buddha named is associating with good people. You should associate it with people who understand the Dhamma, because then you can learn from them and get inspired by them and then also understand the Dhamma. And then based on that, you should inform yourself and try to understand what the Buddha taught via videos, other people, books, or other resources. There are countless resources nowadays. Reading the suttas is also a very good idea. Suttas for starters are a very good starting point. But you should also keep the 5 moral precepts, because they are the basis for awakening. The 5 moral precepts make sure that you do not act too badly out of greed, aversion, and delusion. And again, every act out of greed, aversion, and delusion requires a self. And every act that requires a self makes the self stronger. But you want to weaken the self. Because again, Buddhism is all about non-self in the end. The Buddha even said that the continuous perception of non-self, the dwelling of non-self in all things, is what Nibbana is. He was very clear on that in several suttas. And you should also refrain from actions that are rooted in greed, aversion, and delusion, even if they are not technically breaking the precepts. Because there are things that are unclear, that depend on your motivation. This is also very important, and we will learn a lot about that in the next chapter. And then you should endure bad feelings, not just act out of them immediately. When there is a bad feeling, we have to ultimately disown it. We have to ultimately stop immediately acting out of the craving that a bad feeling induces. And that requires enduring the bad feeling. Again, that is a part of the moral training that we will learn more about. And also very important, we should not tolerate, welcome, or delight in unwholesome thoughts, words, or deeds. Again, those require a self, and we want to weaken the self. So we should refrain from doing such things. We should also try to be mindful during everyday activities, simply because there are a lot of everyday activities and comparably little meditation on the cushion. But again, you can also meditate on the cushion following certain methods, but you should be very clear on concerning your understanding of the limitations of meditation methods, and that it is only a tiny part of the puzzle. But we will learn a lot more about meditation methods and their limitations, etc. in chapter 9. But anyway, let us continue. So yeah, this slide is about the non-benefit of thinking wrongly about meditation. Meditation is one part of the practice, but not it. If you want to check if you are practicing correctly, you can ask yourself a few questions. For example, do I just meditate and expect everything to get better by just doing that? If that is your expectation, then liberation is far away from you and you are not really moving towards it, because liberation cannot come through just meditating. There is also a lot of understanding involved. And also, what is your tendency of improvement? Do you see improvement? Do you want to do more, or do you want to do less related to meditation? Does meditation feel like a chore and is not something you look forward to? Right mindfulness, as the Buddha explained, is effortless, always. So if you are having more effort or have to muster more effort at being mindful, then there is actually more of a regression to be expected. And the sensation watching meditations that are very popular nowadays, they require a lot of effort in their mindfulness. It's not the mindfulness that the Buddha talked, by the way. The term is heavily overloaded. Mindfulness, as it is taught now, has like 40 different meanings or something like that. The Buddha was very clear, and I already gave you the definition. But still, there are still so many myths going around that it is a good idea to emphasize that the Buddha's mindfulness is not the mindfulness that many other people nowadays teach. And another one is, do you experience no reduction in overall suffering? Again, if you suffer the same as before or even worse, then there is something likely wrong. Initially, it can feel worse, but overall, when you do it 1, 2, 3 years, there should be a reduction in suffering. Otherwise, there is something wrong. And now to a few definitions of mind states or important words that the Buddha was talking about. And this one is very important, and I want to emphasize this a lot, because in the beginning, in the Why Knowledge Seems Useless part of this chapter, we discussed a lot how we have to refine our understanding of important things like feelings. And in this slide, we want to make sure that we have to understand the right words. And it can feel like this in the comic. I sadly do not know the source, so I cannot really attribute anyone. But as you can see, there is a huge cloud of different words that you have no idea about. So in the beginning, you pretty much have to learn a new language of concepts and anything like that. So to really understand what other people are talking about. What is all this higher self or whatever people are talking about? It requires a lot of refining of understanding and knowledge. Otherwise, understanding is very difficult. And yeah, a short disclaimer. For the next chapters, we do need rough ideas of what words and concepts mean. A lot of them I have already given to you in the form of exercises and experiments and sometimes definitions, but we need some ideas of the words we know. And those ideas we have about words are often incomplete, as I already showed you in the 2 overlying square diagrams in the beginning. If you understand what the Buddha meant with, for example, feelings, you would be an arahant. Fully understanding feelings means that you are an arahant. So until then, if you are not an arahant, it's very likely that you have not fully understood feelings and what the Buddha meant by it. And the same applies to many, many other words. If you have fully understood dukkha, then you also would be an arahant. So it's very good to assume that there are still some blind spots for you that you have to fix. Only the arahant sees sankhara dukkha in all things, as an example. For everyone else, there is at least some degree of ignorance remaining. And yeah, you have to understand words in your experience. This is also very important. It's not about understanding the words intellectually. The Buddhist nun Ayya Khema always said that insight and understanding are recognized experience. The Buddha talked about direct knowing and seeing. It's not about knowing, it's about knowing and seeing. So you have to map the concepts and words to experiences you make or you have. Only on the basis of that can you really understand the Buddha's teaching. It's not enough to memorize words like vocabulary test, memorization in school or something like that. What matters is a deep understanding of what the Buddha meant. What matters is the meaning and not the wording. You can use different words to describe what the Buddha meant. He did so too. This is why the people nowadays think that the Buddha gave 17,500 different lectures. In the end, the content of pretty much all those suttas or lectures is the same. The Buddha was very clear that he only teaches one thing, suffering and how it stops. You can summarize that as one thing, as a Dhamma, or you can split it up in various different ways. And that is why many synonyms can be beneficial. Some people have words in their mind that appeal more to their understanding. We have a certain mapping of information in our mind that we have to work with. So some people might like the word desire better, some people might like the word craving better, etc. There are many different ways of phrasing, but the meaning should always be the same. So yeah, but let us continue. So as an example, I always like to use this diagram when it comes to the entire sense experience as we have it. So in a sense, we have 6 sensory organs, namely the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the skin, and the mind. And all of those senses can detect things. And all those senses, the 5 physical senses at the bottom, meet in the mind, as the Buddha said. So the mind can become aware of all the other things. And all those things that exist in the mind already have a valuation attached to them. They already have a good, bad, or neutral attached to them. In this case, green indicates good, red indicates bad, and gray would indicate neutral. I have not really put something gray there because gray feelings or neutral feelings are very hard to detect. They are very subtle, and most people are not capable of detecting them. So when you don't feel anything at all, it's very likely a neutral feeling, as an example. But as you can see here, whatever we detect with the senses already has those valuations built into them. There's already a feeling tone to all those experiences, which is very important. And now the entire experience as a whole arises first. And then, based on that, we have something that we call attention, and that attention zooms in on certain parts of our experience. And that is what most people think of as mindfulness. And when the Buddha described mindfulness, he was very clear on the fact that he regards it as a bit different. And I want to read another citation from the suttas for you. And how is mindfulness of the body developed? The Buddha continues, having folded his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and having brought mindfulness to the force. Just mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. Breathing in long, he knows I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he knows I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he knows I breathe out short. Furthermore, when walking, the monk discerns I am walking. When standing, he discerns I am standing. When sitting, he discerns I am sitting. Or however his body is disposed. That is how he discerns and knows it. This is from Majjhima Nikaya number 119, and it's one of the most elaborate descriptions that the Buddha gave us when it comes to mindfulness. In essence, the word just means remembering. You are remembering in the present moment what your body, for example, is doing. This is mindfulness of the body. And right mindfulness also has the connotation of non-self, of Dhamma to it. But at the beginning, we don't really have that, so we have to train ourselves to gradually end up there. So whenever the Buddha talked about mindfulness, he talked about doing several things at once. Namely, having an experience and knowing about that experience. So this is a very good definition of mindfulness. And this includes the background of our experience. We discern more and more things at once and not focus in on sensations and try to learn their cosmic secrets by looking really closely or really fast. This is one of the biggest myths when it comes to meditation, and you can never get liberated based on sensation watching. There are people out there who claim that liberation is not even possible, simply because they follow those sensation watching techniques, and on the basis of that, they cannot get rid of their tanha. They can't, because it's not the method that gets rid of tanha. Again, you can scan the QR code here for a more elaborate version of the sutta. Again, I have to shorten it, otherwise it does not fit on slides. So mindfulness is about what is not in the small lens of magnification. This is very important. The more mindful you are, the more of the background of experience will be available to you. But there are a lot of other words that you should also contemplate when it comes to the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha never taught things that are unrelated to awakening, as an example. Everything he taught is always either a precondition for awakening or directly concerned towards the Dhamma. And it's really important to understand the suttas. I really like to emphasize that. If you still suffer, something is not fully understood. This is a very good rule of thumb. And dependent origination is especially important, as we will also understand it in future chapters. But you can only really understand certain things based on your experience. Be careful of those words you have some idea of, because that usually leads to a misunderstanding. If you know the pointer to a concept, you just assume that another person means the same thing. This is also why Dhamma videos have incredible rewatch value, because if you do it rightly, your understanding of feeling, of Vedana, of all those things will constantly change. And when you then rewatch a video, the meaning will be entirely different. So by all means, if you don't understand something fully, you can rewatch 1 or 2 of those lecture videos here to refine your understanding. Because it's a good thing if your understanding of certain words changes for the better. Because in the beginning, it is likely wrong or not fully correct, at least. Because you have a meaning assigned to the word feeling already. And thus you assume that you already understand it, even though the Buddha means something entirely different. And you have to access the meaning that the Buddha used and not your understanding. If your understanding was right, you would be completely free from suffering and you would be an arahant. But most people are not, so their understanding is flawed in some area. So you have to contemplate all the words the Buddha used a lot until they make perfect sense and actually free you from suffering. So you should try to understand craving, feeling, self, consciousness, sankharas, very important, anicca, dukkha, dukkha with a big D, anatta, mindfulness, awareness, all those terms should be understood and really contemplated. And I have created a nice word cloud just to give you an idea. There are lots of things that are very important that the Buddha frequently mentioned. You technically don't have to understand all of them, but there are some concepts that are so fundamental that you should really make an effort to understand them. What is anatta? What is this non-self that the Buddha talked so much about? What is jhana really? There are countless meanings to jhana. Every teacher nowadays has a specific jhana or a specific thing he calls jhana. And people go for it, never questioning that there can't be 40 right definitions for jhana. What is virtue? What is mindfulness? What is liberation? What are sankharas, dukkha, feeling, self? All those things are very, very important to keep in mind. And you should really make an effort to understand them. The suttas talk a lot about all those things. And from stream entry onwards, the suttas will start making a lot more sense to you. And this is very much a good thing, because you suddenly start talking the language of the Buddha, as I like to phrase it. Suddenly you have the experiences that are necessary to understanding the Dhamma. Then the meaning of non-self or anatta will be much, much clearer than before. In fact, it is completely impossible to understand the correct meaning of anatta without the right view. You can have an intellectual idea, and that is good to have it, and refine it over and over to ultimately end up at the right thing. But until we have the liberating experience of the right view, the understanding will be very much flawed. Only Sotapanna or onwards can really understand what an arahant is. Everything else is completely impossible. But let us now come to the most important point, and I think we are even a bit faster than I expected. So what are the key points of chapter 4? First of all, most knowledge initially seems useless, and it does not solve an immediate problem of yours. To look for a specific piece of knowledge, you need an immediate problem that is related to that piece of knowledge. Otherwise, you cannot accept it as something beneficial. Very important to keep in mind. So either make something by contemplating it rightly, immediate and relevant to you, or you have to just look for relevant things and have to rewatch videos over and over. That's not a problem, by the way. If you have the time at hand, you can progress like that. And also, words are mere pointers to mental models, as we have learned in the beginning. And it is easy to misunderstand others and yourself, because pointers do not contain the information of the entire mind map that is in your head, in your mind. And as a result of all of this, the Buddha called the miracle of instruction the biggest miracle of them all. The fact that you can explain things to other people so that they can understand, so that they can ultimately be liberated on account of that. That is a true miracle. And he said that, for example, in Anguttara Nikaya 60. And further, mundane right view is necessary for stream entry. You cannot attain the supramundane right view without the mundane right view. You cannot attain stream entry without. And this includes self-honesty, a narrow mindset, thirst for truth, some faith, logical thinking, and the acceptance of a state of affairs that you are in as flawed. Your starting point is with the self, and you have to overcome craving with craving. It is not possible otherwise. You cannot just step outside of your craving. Everything that you do is motivated by craving in some way or another. This is why the Four Noble Truths are so noble. Because the ultimate intention of all things is always to avoid suffering. And you, as a person who might not have the right view yet, will act through your craving. So it has to be weakened before, so that you can end up at a state without craving, at least for some times. And formal meditation is just one small part, or piece of the puzzle, piece of the practice. You have to practice in many different ways, and not just practice by watching your sensations or something like that, or not just by experiencing nice pleasures, because ultimately the meditation that the Buddha taught transcends feelings altogether. So if you just meditate to get nice feelings, then you have to question your practice a little bit. Very important. And also refine your understanding of relevant Buddhist ideas and concepts, because ultimately the understanding sets you free. The understanding lets you transcend suffering, so that you are not touched by it anymore. It's not that the suffering or the bad feelings are not there, you're just not touched by them anymore. But anyway, now to the meditation of the day. It's a breath segmentation meditation that I really like. You can scan the QR code to get there. This one is really good, is a really good training in non-reactivity that can help you there if you should struggle with that. Any kind of formal meditation can be regarded as a method to weaken your mind's reactivity, to restrain your senses, because you are doing something that the mind is not particularly enjoying. And if you keep at it, then it gets nicer and nicer over time, simply because the craving vanishes, and a state where there is no craving is always very beneficial and very nice. So you can scan it, but again, be aware of the limitations. It's not the only thing that you should do. It's one piece of a bigger puzzle. And now is a good time for questions and answers. Please post them below the video, so I will collect them and answer them later. I will also answer them in text form initially, but for a broader audience to benefit, I will also collect them and answer them in the form of a video. Also, it would be good not to answer to a comment that I make, but to start a new thread. Otherwise, YouTube will usually not inform me, and I will probably overview your questions, and that is not a good thing. So whenever you can, create a new comment and not a comment to a comment. The comments to comments are something that YouTube will not tell me, but everything else is something that YouTube will inform me about. So anyway, this was pretty much it for today. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy what I do, feel free to share the lecture with other people, so other people can also benefit from the content here. Here are a few links that you can scan if you want to find books of me, join the Dhamma Hub Discord, or want to support me on Patreon or Amazon via books or something like that. But yeah, again, thank you very much for watching. I hope you benefit from the presented knowledge. But yeah, hopefully until next time, and goodbye.